Greetings, my friends, sailors of our dear contaminated and only spacecraft, the only one that has turned around once again on its imaginary axis and, of course, continues creating events. And if you don't see me in foot, it's because we have a guest, a very interesting person, Javier Corso Permuy, congressman of the European Parliament by Spain, born in 1968 in Ferrol, Spanish, of course. He belongs to Izquierda Unida. He's a politician, and he has history and is making history. He's a social activist, he has practiced politics, and this called my attention in a very pleasant way. When he was young, he played the battery in the anarchist punk group Sin Dios. Audiovisual worker, as he said very humbly. He was formed by RTV, and he was a cameraman assistant. He helped his brother and learned the tour and has a degree in audiovisual journalist in Jose Marti. That sounds very good in these areas. He has worked in different producers. He has directed camera. He was also a clerk, a musician, and bookman. Well, we all have a little of everything, and we have to be a little crazy to be around this. To be fair, if we read all your curricula, we're going to miss all the show. I was invited by the National Electoral Council to accompany these regional elections in a moment that, due to my occupation in the European Parliament and Foreign Affairs Commission, where I am one of the vice president, it's a very important one, well, we will have opportunity to talk about the European Parliament and European Union. It would be nice to listen to your version. Parliament does not legislate, but this commission is very important. It's the largest one. But when I've studied, it comes before many operations that take place around the world, convincing the public opinion. In this commission, Venezuela, of course, is permanent there, especially by Spanish right-wing and so-called socialist. And I say so-called because they are less socialist every day. And for me, it was very important to save this electoral process. I was visiting schools, auditing, asking the opposition witnesses, PCUV, and everybody. Next Thursday, we have a Foreign Affairs Commission where we're going to have the ambassador of the European Union. I know he will make many objections to Venezuela, anticipating what we're seeing. We know they are preparing because of a document of the Europeans who work here, Federica Mogherini, who is a high representative in foreign affairs, to sanction for the first time Venezuela. So it will be very useful for all this analysis, practical and professional analysis of these elections. I think that as the center of the world passes by Syria, now it passes by Venezuela also. I have to say that I really think listening to people who accuse this electoral process. President Carter himself came with his team here and made a full visit. And when he finished, he said, we have been witnessed 92 electoral processes throughout the planet. Venezuela's electoral system is the best in the world. Now, Carter, former U.S. president, former Navy official who had his nuclear button on the hand, made this sound statement, and all the bureaucrats in Europe who perhaps thinks Venezuela are beaches and beauties in bikini dare to talk about like that about Venezuela. Yes, but we do have to talk about the anti-journalism we are living, because what they're not doing is informing. They're making propaganda, because we listen and hear to opinions of some leaders without any proof. It's funny that the people in my country are being uninformed like this. Systematic work since Hugo Chavez won elections. And I think it's been how he reacted after the assault of March 11. We just suffered another one. Our people are continuously deceived, and they don't even know. People who don't know the name of the Portuguese president, but they do know the name of the Venezuelan president. They believe he's his full enemy. And El País, the newspaper, are talking about post-truth. They are post-truth. They are manufacturing stories and realities that, as Goebbels said, if you repeat a lie 1,000 times, it becomes a truth. But they never tell you the audits performed before, including opposition, the biometric controls for voters, in situ audits made before closing, after closing, and now the audit that will take place at the request of the Socialist Party, the president, and also the opposition. So what world are we living in where the facts are inexistent, and what exists is misinformation? And I've seen this with my own eyes. I've talked with ones and others in a complete normality that I never thought 2 months ago. So you came here with some doubts, right? Yes, I followed the National Constitutional Assembly. That was also a surprise for me, because it stopped this street terrorism that is quite concerning in some places in the country, with paramilitary and operations that I think are testing for future armed attacks. We can talk about fourth-generation wars and stuff like this. And suddenly, this stopped because of the will of 8 million voters, in spite of the threats and assaults to electoral centers. The image of people crossing a river to vote, that is really exciting. So I came with a hope, but also with a doubt, because I didn't know what was happening. And I'm leaving highly satisfied, because at least we can give the voice to the Venezuelan democracy. And I tell them, I've seen it with my own eyes. I have the reports of electoral experts and guests. So give me arguments, not propaganda. It's very good to listen that from you. You know that we have several problems here. The first is my hierarchy at this time, because things are flowing and change fast, something that we repeat once and again. The Middle East oil takes 45 days to reach Texas. The world's largest reserve is here in Venezuela, and takes 4 or 5 days to get there without crossing any danger zones. It was natural that when Commander Chavez said there will be no foreign military bases in the home of Bolivar. And our Colombian neighbors accepted 7, not only 1. And the last thing they did was whatever a U.S. soldier does in Colombia, even, and let me say this, even in case of rape, they cannot judge them. They have to render it to the country. For me, that's even worse than what Japan suffered from the United States. Well, it seems that this is not as dominant in bilateral agreements when the United States places its bases. When they sign an agreement, they immediately put to the international law above any law, and this is why nothing can be done in case of U.S. flaw. What you said about the days to transport oil, John McCain said that. A Republican politician who directs 2 institutes that, curiously enough, are always directing the news. They talk a lot about Venezuela, Ukraine, Libya, and Syria. And I think it's very important that that's why I said that Venezuela is the center of the world. They have the largest certified reserves of the world. They have aquifers, and the future wars can be because of water. And with the climate change, we're looking at that. And it also has precious minerals, land that can use high technology, but mostly for me, the most important is that it has a regional project for integration that clashes against neoliberal process, as all free trade agreements are. I was honored to be in Mar del Plata in 2005 when ALCA was created. I met Commander Chavez there when he said such an important speech. I remember the Argentinian president enjoying that speech. And this is another one who died suspiciously. We have to suspect all these deaths because Chavez died at a time he was developing one of the great marvels, because I studied the plan of the nation, Plan de la Patria, for this country to become intermediate regional power, and especially collecting the historic characters of Venezuelan independence. That's why he talked about a second independence. And it's important because we're looking at all the wars that are occurring because of energy. The world is disputing the power that lasted. There's a competition for a multipolar world with China, Russia, but especially China, that has special weakness in mineral resources. Would you like to explain this on the map? No, I wouldn't dare. I prefer to remain seated. Well, I can support you. What you just said is so clear. All the great oil producers and the large majority, 45%, passes through this place, Hermes, 10, 12 miles wide, but the route, the Indian Cape, South Atlantic, Mid-Atlantic, and come up to Texas are 45 days. And we mustn't forget that one of the great business of oil is transportation, a collateral business. So it's 45 shipping days, while the planet's main reserve is here in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, 4 or 5 days. The proportion is 10 to 1. But we also, besides strategic minerals and water, we have biodiversity that is unknown still. So how strange is it that in the spirit of Santander, our Colombian neighbors accepted 7 bases that President Chavez refused to have here? First, they wanted to place in the Dutch Antilles, which is NATO, and this historic nation, Colombia, accepted 7 bases. And the last thing is whatever U.S. soldier does, he cannot be touched, or he or she. Well, it's important to point this out because they use these attacks, propaganda, journalism, and the same. If we study, the same happened in Ukraine, Iraq, Syria, to explain why there's a clear interest in destabilizing these governments. It's the same thing with, and we knew it with the Middle East, that is balkanization, and finished the few proof of those pan-Arab samples, whether we like it or not. They were local. That started with Iraq. That was not a destruction of a government, but the destruction of a state that had very important professional population. It was a small country that became a key element contrary to Israel and Saudi Arabia hegemony. And all these have been destroyed. The same happens in Libya and Syria. Fortunately, in Syria, this has stopped momentarily, this destruction. And all these countries are multi-religious. In spite of all the propaganda, I lead the peace process in Syria.
Tú lideras. Yo quiero rendir honor a quien honor merece. Este es el pan de cada día, todo este proceso que tú acabas de
needs. This is our daily topic and is reflected in our daily analysis. So to have the leader of the group here, besides being a double honor, I would like you to tell us how our pressures and lobbying, because these are silenced wars with a knife under the table. Fortunately, in the work of a monster like the European Parliament with 751 members, they don't defend their peoples. What are they doing there? They're taking care of their seats? Most of them, yes, probably, and especially to say, to comply with orders upstairs, but you can also find people with dignity, even if you can have different political views, you can respect, for example, the UN Charter. And this is how peace is born. I found people from Partido Popular, the right-hand, liberal, socialist, and we started talking on how we didn't understand Syria. European Union only talks with some groups of the opposition, telling as if they represented the country, but they never talk to the Syrian government, which is one of the main stakeholders because it has territorial control, etc. So this seemed very strange, and we joined and started taking steps to visit Syria and then carry out a mediation between the European Union and Syria to discuss, because peace is made with enemies, not with friends. Well, the peace has to be done with the enemies, not with the friends. That is evident. Well, we have thought of 2 trips, one year ago, and and the other one was in March this year. The first time we visited Damascus, we met President Bashar al-Assad, and the second visit was broader. It was the first time we entered the freed Aleppo. We talked with government officials, with United Nations officials, religious, Orthodox, Christian, Maronite representatives, Muslim representatives. We talked with the Czech embassy that never closed its doors there. So it was diverse. They can't accuse us because in the first accused us, as they do always, that we only met with the president. The attacks of one part of the left that has been captured we were all together against the Iraq war, no matter what political view we had. But here, we broke that image. It seems that this left supports more terrorists than independence processes. So we found a reality that we must tell the people. Aleppo is recovered. People are going back to their homes. It was the industrial heart of Syria. They took their factories to Turkey. Curiously enough, Turkey was always the country that took care of the left side of NATO. Well, when we captured the eastern neighborhoods, we found food from the European Union, medicines from terrorists that they didn't have water for several months. Terrorists had cut them, and nobody told us. And two things I want to emphasize. The Ministry of Conciliation, a very well-known opponent against Arafat. His son was killed in war. And he started a series of conciliation processes that affect 3 million Syrians. And this is unprecedented in history. Well, there are people of goodwill that are combating the government, but terrorists. So the concept of respect and leaving the arms with dignity, that is very close to Syrian culture. A mediator is sought, can be a social, religious character. And they offer amnesty to people who want to leave arms and being incorporated in the police or the army. And those who refuse to abandon, they take them with their arms to the province of Islam. And we verified this. So with this, they separate terrorists. Most of them are murderers coming from 89 nationalities, or from people who made a mistake in good faith. So there are more than 90,000 amnesties, and this is allowing people to return. But this is not told to the West. And important, our meeting with Bashar al-Assad, he said he's changing the constitution, accepting other parties. And once terrorism is over, he has no problem in consulting the people, because I do believe the people has to decide. And we arrived to Europe, and Mogherini didn't receive us. We asked him for a meeting explaining what the Czech embassy told us that well, she didn't receive us, and every time I can be on a table and closed-door meeting when she comes to meeting and ask her, she has to talk with everybody, because we verified, because the anti-terrorist collaboration has all countries except France, since France had been training with special forces. So all former colonials have their hands in there, all of them. So that's all we asked for, a channel, because we have to talk with all stakeholders to help at times where when people are returning to, and Aleppo was freed, and the war is about to end. I am very scared with what is happening with the Kurdish people. We're looking how the Iraqi people are fighting in Kirkuk, or the Turkish troops that are getting into Syrian territory. And the work of a Congress member must be talk, like the word parliament says. So we invited to the Syrian Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs to France, and the President of European Parliament prohibited us to that invitation because of security. Well, that is laughable. I've had some experiences that I thank God, in Venezuela. Saddam Hussein's Iraq, northern Kurdish, at the center their own ethnic group, and the south what was left. I saw complete free movement from south to the north. The Kurdish people had their own parliament, their own communication means, their own language, and when they didn't alter the country's unity and sovereignty, they were considered citizens as any other. They invent this war. Of course, it was an important oil power, member of OPEC, and they don't forgive us, Venezuela being the creators of OPEC. But Iraq was working as a Swiss clock, and they had a enviable level of life. I always saw planes full of packages and liquor coming from Europe. And the same thing I saw with Gaddafi's Libya, that I also had the honor to know. And they destroyed Maghreb according to political interests. Am I wrong? No, it's completely destroyed. It's clear. In Syria, I was in Syrian Kurdistan, in Rojava, and I was very happy to see that Kurdish did not ask for independence, but a federal republic. That's a progress, but unfortunately, I thought it was very strange. I visited Baghdad in 2004 to honor my brother who was murdered in Hotel Palestina when he was working as a cameraman. My brother was in 14th floor, and 15th is Reuters. Knowing that the press was there, that was murder, to shut him up. Yes, they were M1, Abrams 1, they were over a bridge, positioned. They had no threat against of weapons against cars. Everybody knew the press was there. A car looks for protection. They never did that. Allow me to say what I show here. The Yemen stopped at the bridge and takes all the time for a perfect shot and shoots to the balcony. That is a crime of humanity. And it was an explosive used against the infantry. There were 200 journalists there, and everybody knew the press was there, but they chose the exact balcony. And, well, I tell you this because we had a judicial case because of war crime against command chain, Sergeant Jensen. I can't remember the names right now, but even Colonel Wolfer and the general, that curiously enough, when they finished with the 3 direct signals, Al Jazeera, Reuters, and Abu Dhabi television, he let the Fox television get in there. So going back to the topic, we had that case open, even if I'm sorry I opened this wound that is personal in your case, but this was the news are bad, kill the journalist. Well, they didn't know what they would find while crossing the Tigris on the other side. If they would have urban guerrilla that uses great bombarding means, and they have many deaths, civil deaths. So they wanted to take away direct signals because they only attacked direct. My brother was there in the other floor. I was in that hotel. I didn't live that circumstance, and I was there before, and I crossed that bridge so many times. This was a war crime. So the judge was very brave of the national hearing, made the reconstruction in situ, and we presented reports from a Spanish military report and physicians of Complutense University of Madrid, and I think they use this. They have these weapons with night vision, thermal vision. They had a perfect view at 4 kilometers. The conclusion of the summary, the judge determined that it had been an operation designed to threaten journalists and impede their work, and according to all international law principles. So we filed a demand against the change of law. So a Spanish woman citizen was kidnapped for human trafficking in Morocco, and if the victim is not in Spain, the Spanish law cannot file any suit. It's very strange. So I was telling you that I wanted to honor my brother, and the U.S. soldiers didn't allow me to enter the room to set some flowers. It was full of combat cars and walls, so we were about to leave. There were combats. We left by the Iraqi Kurdistan. And we saw Israeli, with my own eyes, I saw this, Israeli patrols there. So all this Kurdish charter that you can't balkanize those countries. I think that there's an interest to change the Middle East map according to U.S. and Israelis' interests. Well, it's curious that when they enter in Iraq with what Paul Bremer did was a complete mess, because if you see the influence was, I didn't understand. They had an enviable level of life. The Kurds in the north, the Shiites in the mid, their own language, their own education, and now they're great warriors. Yes, and they made things hard. Even if the Iraqi resistance, in spite of the protests in 2011 in the Alhambra zone, there was a sectarian position of al-Maliki and turned the army in a confessional militia. And this displaced many officers from the Iraqi army to Daesh. And this was the worst that could happen. It went just to Syria, like a forest burning. But I think that what they pretend with this balkanization, besides keeping them from getting to these resources, they have strengthened the contrary. The resistance, Iran, Lebanon, and Syria have strengthened so things went wrong for them, and have Russia as their ally. Without talking bad about the Syrian army that has 100,000 deaths because of the terrorist actions financed by those countries we all know. Of course, by destabilize the Middle East and reaccommodate according to their interests. But you know about military issues. What support did they have to keep this war so many years against a Syrian Arab army, against Hezbollah, that a militia that showed his combat capacity, even with attacking Israeli weapons, against the Russian air support and also Iranian intelligence? How much, in a scenario that is completely flat, how did they sustain those combats against that force? We have to think about that. That is fully consistent with what I say. My TV viewers are witness. There's a master plan to change the Middle East map. Oil, strategic minerals, I think that, or a field of security to some friends. I think it's related to everything. First, friends, Israel and Saudi Arabia. Turkey could change, we will see that. And another, Saudi Arabia went to Russia, so things are moving very fast. But I think there's a clear attempt of preventing the access to China, these concentric accesses, and the destabilization of the peripheries of the United States. On one hand, the periphery with Russia. This is what we Europeans have to be U.S. protection to contain Russia, and on the other hand, China. European Union and NATO is very interesting. NATO has changed completely. This is an essential topic. Tell us about that. NATO, they changed in 2011 the Lisbon summit. It's no longer a North Atlantic treaty. It was it used to be an alliance against nuclear weapons to contain Soviet Union, very unequal with Europe because, as you know very well, the military command has the command on the button, and this made de Gaulle leave the military structure. Yes, the old general was giving lessons, and then it changed in 2011. They said before NATO was constrained to international law, the United Nations. Now it's not. It talks about they can intervene in any place in the world where their interests are affected, and they're signaling many things: energy, resources, water, and migration. I have been repeating that one of the great resources of Venezuela is water, and the future wars will be made by drinking water. And especially Warsaw and Brussels, Wales before, that started changing the view to Russia because Russia escaped the idea they have decided with Yeltsin, for example, that is a broken and subjected state, and always asking permission. The letter of Paris that talked about a common security space with Russia, and they never left that. They know very well why. Because if Russia, that provides almost 100% of the gas to the European Union, except something of Spain through Argelia, Argelia, we would need as much from the United States. So Russia ended the Chechnya War, Mr. Putin. All the destabilization processes like Georgia, it just stopped it. It cleaned its peripheral area and starts playing with gas. And besides, part of the German class wants to have relations with Russia. Another one follows Washington orders. And it gives a leap in the international projection. We have seen what has happened in Crimea. It was evident if you destabilize Ukraine and you have the fleet to the Black Sea, you're not going to give it away. And Crimea has been struggling since 1853, and it's the heart of Russia. The fleet cannot arrive to the Mediterranean. When they broke the Yugoslavia and when they allowed the Kosovo independence to place the U.S. largest base called Bonestil, allied to a series of mercenaries and organ traffickers. So when Russia started escaping from that map and even subjected map they had fabricated, the NATO started containing it to the south. They started restraining it. Those agreements were made orally between Gorbachev and Bush or Reagan, I can't remember. Probably George W. Bush. He went to the reserve in order not to combat. They agreed not to touch strategic protection, and the Warsaw summits and the follows did the contrary. They created a very high available force. They started touching borders, and they started operating the anti-missile shield with a complete change of nuclear power on one and other side. They started with AFIS in La Rota base we have in Spain, unfortunately. They have, NATO has always had that. And then they have the land access in Romania, Poland, and that changed the strategic balance. And you will see all missile treaties are terminating, because if they're trying to move to with missile and nuclear weapons, you have to change and start moving your soldiers as well. What they're using us as aircraft military protection on Russia in order to have to contain Russia, and especially to avoid this. United States with fracking has exported oil. This couldn't be done constitutionally, and they want to give that oil and gas, which is very much expensive, instead of us buying to a neighbor. If you see in the European Parliament, the people against Russia is worse than in McCarthy times. You couldn't think that this happens in a modern Europe, and after reaching an institution as the European Parliament, it's terrible, because the Defense Security Commission I belong, well, you are in the eye of the hurricane. It's chaired by a former Polish minister that hates Russia. I think it's pathological, that hate. Well, since the Second War in Poland, this lady, Madame Fotiva, well, I will be traveling in this commission to Norfolk, because I think we have to do everything in Virginia. That's the members have to be everywhere, and I'm gonna travel with her. Well, the Polish pilots were great in the Second World War. Well, for you to have an idea of the currents, we have a report against Russian propaganda. They say are similar to Daesh. They want to restart a Cold War? No, it's worse than that. And now what she's asking that we consider enemy journalists with Russian media. And this resolution was accepted in the parliament, and there's a NATO communication center devoted to create independent, that's what they say, media, and to work against Russian propaganda, as if the European Union didn't do the same to finish and with the needs of the countries of the South. European Union is not a confederation, it's not a state. We could say it's an authoritarian community chaired by Germany. It has the southern countries and periphery are not industrialized because of the European Union. They also have external debt, and they have a euro as the Deutschmark, very powerful currency, and sells value-added products. That has to. My country is the most unequal in Europe, the second most unequal in Europe after Romania, Spain. I'll tell you, we have 1 million children who eat once a day when they go to school, usually. 2 million families that receive no income, they have nobody working. 300,000 youngsters who have fled Spain. So we live a Ford society and a post-Ford society, and that will explode someday. Fortunately, we still have some social protection that they haven't destroyed yet with the treaties that they want to do, and in education. They are about to destroy. We are in a country that is going to third world. We are practically in international European labor division. We are devoted to tourism. That's it. We had a great time. We went to Franco times. But worse, because in the 60s, Franco pretended to create a middle class, and he did. He had a nationalistic thought. We had national manufacturers, and now we are a segregated country that are losing social protection. But more than that, I am interested in the future of my country. I want industry. I want fishing industry, agriculture. We have a stable country with no great natural catastrophes, and they don't allow us that. We have to stay with tourism only. We had a good times with Felipe Gonzalez, but it was the cohesion funds from European Union applied to great infrastructure and a development of real estate. And we are in recession, and the worst thing is that in all southern countries, in the northern and the periphery, the extreme right is growing because, you know, in critical times, this is growing. And I'm very concerned of the future of this European Union that gives lessons to Venezuela. And look who says it. Please repeat the importance of your position. Well, it's not as important, but I am one of the vice presidents of the Foreign Affairs Commission. I'm also a member of the Subcommission of Security and Defense. And this is something I have to battle, that I'm very proud to see if I could help something there. Member of a special commission of on terrorism, which will take place 1 year to recommend the United Nations against terrorism. And I want to talk about financing of terrorist groups, the use of the terrorist charter to destabilize countries, the use of alleged terrorism to destabilize countries. Yes, I want to emphasize on that. And all these exception laws implementing in France and Spain and other countries that helps terrorism. They kill us, they take away our freedoms. There are people interested in people winning to establish a macro system. Yes, that is so, exactly. Well, brother of noble causes, I would like you to have something that had me 75 Sundays without rest. I was awarded with the National Journalist Radio, TV. Let's see if we complete it with Written Press Awards. It was 75 Sundays of analyzing the political panorama. And it was the best-selling book in the International Book Fair of Caracas. And this was edited by the publishing company created by Commander Chavez. And perhaps we can find each other in these roads because it's all international material. I'm very proud of having you here because you talked about things that I had left as old open wounds. Hotel Palestine. We're going to end up by crying, both of us. But listen, I was in Iraq. I knew Iraq without a war, the same with Libya, in Frente Polisario, 4,000 kilometers in Sahara. Sahara doesn't pardon the weak. And I admire both sides because it's very difficult to combat in Sahara. Let me tell you that I am very proud of having you here and that you are obliged to pass through Dossier every time you come. It's an honor to be here, and I will always be willing when you invite me. My best wishes to all your peers and those who still believe there's a common root. And that in spite of all the politicians like Felipe Gonzalez, when he came here, he was looking for his assistant check. And just in Sahara, I waited for 9 hours before his party. But God bless you. And as Christians we are, as I guess, I hope God allows us to live interesting times. We finished this exciting interview with a character that we always want to have here because he has honored us with his presence. This is the Spain that unites us because of our genes, our values, and our culture. This is Walter Martinez, producer, conductor of Dossier.